I asked ChatGPT a question, so let's get to it. Where is it? How tyranny begins and ends. So tyranny begins, number one, fear and uncertainty. Tyranny often begins in times of fear, chaos, or instability. People are scared of change, of loss, of danger, and in that fear, they crave order, certainty, safety. Someone steps up and says, I alone can fix this. That's often the first crack in the door. Tyrants offer clarity in confusing times, even if it's the clarity of oppression. Number two, a charismatic figure plus centralized power. There's usually a person or small group who promises strength, unity, and revival. At first, it might seem like strong leadership, but over time, power becomes concentrated. Dissent is painted as disloyalty. Free thought becomes dangerous. Tyranny doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers, "This is for your own good." Erosion of rights, brackets, bit by bit, close brackets. Rights don't vanish overnight, they're chipped away gradually. Free speech becomes hate speech. Journalism becomes fake news. Protest becomes a threat. Laws shift subtly. Institutions are weakened. People often don't realise what's happening until it's normalised and then entrenched. Number four, silencing of the soul. I didn't expect ChatGPT to be talking about the soul. As a soul plan reader, I find that interesting. And for those of you I haven't met before, by the way, my name is Marilyn Devonish, the NeuroSuccess coach. So number four, silencing of the soul. On a personal level, tyranny can begin when we silence ourselves, when we hand our own agency to a voice we think is stronger, smarter, more worthy. That too is tyranny in microcosm. How tyranny ends. Number one, when people wake up. It usually ends when people, sometimes slowly, sometimes all at once, remember who they are. They wake up from fear, they see the lies, they start talking again, organising, risking. All tyranny fears one thing: the awakening of the people. Number two, cracks in the system. Even the most brutal regimes rot from within. Internal dissent, power struggles, economic collapse, outside pressure. Eventually, the weight of control becomes unsustainable. The mask slips. The system breaks under its own rigidity. Number three, creative rebellion. Tyranny often ends not just through war or revolt, but through art, speech, music, satire, whispers in back rooms, courageous acts of truth-telling. It's the human spirit refusing to be caged. Every time someone says no from the heart and means it, tyranny loses oxygen. It ends and begins again unless we stay awake. Tyranny isn't just an external event. It's a pattern, a temptation. That's why the end of one tyranny doesn't mean the end of tyranny. We have to stay vigilant, not just politically, but spiritually. And spiritually is in italics. Again, I wasn't expecting spirit and soul talk from ChatGPT. For those of you who've been around a while, you know for 10 years, every year, first weekend in December, I ran the Mind, Body, Spirit and Soul Energy Fest, which was helping people fortify all of those things and come into their own. So we close with the inner parallel. Says there's a beautiful quote from Carl Jung. Again, you've heard me talk about Jung a lot with synchronicity. So it says, the world hangs on a thin thread, and that thread is the psyche of man. Tyranny begins and ends inside us too. when we suppress parts of ourselves, inner voices, emotions, truths, that's the start. When we reclaim them, when we integrate rather than dominate, that's the healing. And then ChatGPT offers me an invitation. Would you like to explore how this shows up in the world you're navigating, your work, your emotions, your creative path? There's a reason you asked this, and I'd love to explore what's underneath it if you're open. So, what's happening in your world? What are you navigating with your work, your emotions, your creative path? What have you seen going on around you in recent or even past times? I don't know about you, but I recognize some of this pattern, all of this pattern, the fear and uncertainty. We gotta lock you down. Charismatic figure, centralized power, the WHO, the World Health Organization, and all of the politicians on our screens offering the platitudes, the reassurance. The erosion of rights, that started to come a few years later. I'm in the United Kingdom. So the online safety bill, for example, creeping in, eroding freedoms. We're at the stage now where, actually I have to check and see what happened with that, with Telegram. The owner of Telegram was, well, this would have been last year now, he was arrested because he didn't want to hand over the encryption codes so the governments could spy on what people were saying. Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook have faced a similar thing with Messenger, WhatsApp, etc., where the governments are now also wanting the encryption keys, the backdoor code, so they can get in and see what's going on. The erosion of free speech, we've had several people here in the UK locked up for, as people are describing it, hurty words in terms of their saying thing. Actually, there was... two parents were arrested, well, taken to the police station and held a couple of weeks ago for having a WhatsApp chat. And the wife apparently said, and they said, look, they've been through the chat and this is they can't figure out what it was that got them arrested. But one of the things the wife said was that someone on the school committee, board, etc., I think of school governors, was a control freak. And a group of police officers turned up at the house and carted them off. And this was all caught on camera because a lot of people have these Ring doorbell cameras, etc. That's the state that we're in now with the erosion of rights bit by bit. The government have just given themselves the power to look into people's bank accounts. And if they deem that they've got more savings than you would like, there can be consequences for that. And of course, if you haven't been joining the dots, when we come back to something that I and many others have been talking about for at least the last 5 years and saying be wary of this because it has dire consequences, the central bank digital currency, CBDC, as you might see those acronyms floating around. What does that actually mean? Well, what it means is that if that is brought into force, every single transaction you make will be recorded. And if the government then have given themselves these powers to look, it's happening with the DWP, the Department for Works and Pensions at the moment. There are new stories coming out every single day the past 2 weeks. Today is the 22nd of April 2025. And they're going to be scrutinising what people who are receiving benefits are spending their money on. Now, it hasn't got to the stage yet where they'll be saying, you shouldn't be spending on that and you shouldn't be doing this. But we know if you look at places like China, they have restrictions. If you have said anything out, untoward, then you could go and swipe your travel pass and you could find that you can't enter, you can't travel because the government has locked down your travel pass. Not everyone else's. Everyone else can tap and off they go, but you cannot, because you've said something that is not in alignment with the government rhetoric and propaganda, and therefore you're not going anywhere. I know many people have willingly signed up to the carbon trackers, you know, how much carbon, what's my carbon footprint, all sounds like really great fun. But if we look at the erosion of rights, we could very quickly find ourselves in a position where you're planning to go to a friend's wedding and they're in France or America or Australia would probably be worse. And suddenly you find, oh, no, you're not going anywhere because you've used up your carbon credit allowance. And I know it might sound a bit far-fetched, but in November of 2020, I said, this looks interesting. I think where this thing is going with these vaccines is they're going to start forcing people to take them. And I was told that I was scaremongering and saying ridiculous things. A few months later, we had these things called mandates. And we weren't the only ones. There were mandates around the world. And what did that mean? No travel for you if you hadn't got the government recommended vaccine injected into you. And it wasn't just travel. What else did it mean? No jab, no job. Now, when I said that the year before, people laughed at me and they came for me on social media and told me exactly what they thought of me, and it was not pleasant. A few months later, there are mandates. Now, I've had people telling me that a mandate is still a free choice, but when somebody says to you, no job if you don't get that jab, I don't know. For me, that doesn't feel like free choice anymore. That feels like an ultimatum. Or if you're watching a drama on TV, that's blackmail. So when we're looking at this erosion of rights bit by bit, we don't have to look too far back in history to see how that is already at play right now. People are being arrested for saying things that, when you look at what they've said, do not even fall into the category of hate speech. People who spoke the truth were accused of spreading fake news. People who protested in the streets, they were seen as a threat. There was a threat of arrest for just peacefully protesting. So I know this is ChatGPT, it's artificial intelligence. Now, when you take the word artificial and you take the word intelligence, those two things do not equate to technology. Artificial means not real, of course, and intelligence is something that we have as human beings. But I have to say, what ChatGPT has come up with is very similar to what we have lived through since March 2020. We in the UK were told it was just going to be 2 weeks to flatten the curve, and suddenly that spread, what we call in project management terms, mission creep. And then the silencing of the soul. People silence themselves. I have people still messaging me privately to say, oh yeah, I thought that, yeah, I believe that, yeah. They silence themselves. They never spoke out in public. Why? Because they knew the consequence, potential consequence of doing so. So what do we see now? Where are we at now? What does it mean to wake up? How do you create cracks in a system when you realize it is tyrannical and corrupt? What is a creative rebellion? We have seen several, there's not a lot of them, but there are some singers and performers who did actually speak up. Most of them didn't. Most of them were, screaming angrily from their stages and platforms that if you're not vaccinated, you're not welcome here, all of that sort of thing. But you had a few that did speak up, and they unfortunately suffered the consequences. They were cancelled, blacklisted, ridiculed, etc. There's one particular singer who just did not let that stand in his way. 5 times August, he became quite a prolific creator of music and spoken word, which was really powerful. And there have been several of those, but most of the high profile artists and speakers and musicians and comedians. Well, now you would have thought this would be the perfect time for comedians, because they take what's happening in the world around them and they create comedy out of it. But even that didn't happen. The comedy that we did see, there was that particular American TV host. I won't name them, but you can go and look them up. If you maybe just type into YouTube dance, American TV host dancing vaccines, they had people wearing life-size vaccine outfits, and they're all doing like a jazz hands dance behind him and ridiculing those who were questioning the vaccine, because it was new, it was novel, and as it's now being revealed, it was not tested, was not properly tested. They don't have any long-term studies. They could have done with the original mRNA experiments, but what did they do? Well, I did a video about that the other day, about what they did with those experiments, because I went and looked them up in March 2020 once I'd heard the word, and I thought, that's interesting, let me go and look at that. There must be some research somewhere. And Jesus H. Christ, was there the research? Oh my God, it scare the pants off you. So I'll put a link to that video where I talked about it in the description to this one. So yeah, so the people who could have taken the opportunity to really create some good satire from this did not. What they did is they created more division and separation by laughing at and ridiculing the unvaccinated. We even had the pandemic of the unvaccinated and all this sort of stuff. And for those of you who have looked back in history a little bit further, you might recognize some of that division, where a particular race and class of people were gradually, by erosion, portrayed as less than human. They started to, in that particular instance that I'm thinking of, they started to liken them to rodents. And then they would create these posters that would go up in the streets where they had, the elongated faces, the bigger ears, the eyes, and gradually they started to make them look like rodents. And then they started to say they were dirty. They were unclean. They need to be separated from us. And that led into really dark places and spaces for humanity. Yet here we are in 2025 with many people standing back and witnessing the same things happening, not as overt now. This is more covert. This is more clever, the way that they've done it. But from those very first briefings, I looked at it and I laughed. When Boris Johnson was coming out and they had all the black and yellow chevrons, and I was like, oh my God, this is hypnosis right here. And I was laughing because I was thinking, people will see right through this. But then very quickly I realized, no, they are not seeing through it. But if you watch it, for those of you who do NLP and hypnosis, well, no, I can't even say that, because I was saying, I originally said to myself, people who have trained in NLP and hypnosis, they'll recognize this for what it is straight away. Actually, many of them did not. And went along with it all and got caught up in the fear mongering, etc. But I looked at that straight out the gate and I actually laughed and said to myself, oh my God, people are not going to fall for this. Yet here we are 5 years later, where many have still sucked it in hook, line and sinker. So I guess humanity, it is over to you. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? I know what I'm doing. I know what I have been doing for the past 5 years. And what was interesting, again, in March 2020, I said to a very good friend of mine, I said, this is a power grab. She said, what do you mean? I said, it's a power grab. They're going to get people who are currently financially independent. And that doesn't mean like the upper echelons and the billionaires and the multimillionaires. This means the middle class and what you call, moving into that upper class. But, working class people, I think you'd call it now. And you're going to get them on there. You're going to bring them to their knees. Why would you want to bring them to their knees? Because when people are on their knees, they're in what I call Oliver mode. Please, sir, can I have some more? You are not going to bite the hand that feeds you. And so I said in March, just as we were going into lockdown, I think it was Friday the 13th of March that I said it. It was the day that I did a piece on BBC Radio. I did a breakfast interview before heading into London. That was probably, I think that was the last week before everything really went into lockdown. And at that particular point, I said, in terms of remote working, I said organisations are going to struggle to get people back into the office full time. I said that on Friday the 13th of March, 2020, on a BBC breakfast show. It was on very early in the morning. I was on about 5 or 6 a.m. And I don't know that the presenters really believed what I was saying. What happened, 2 years later, 2.5 years later? There was the great resignation where people were resigning from their jobs because their organisations were trying to force them back into the office full time. I said that on Friday the 13th of March 2020. So when I put Futurist in my title and tagline sometimes when I'm describing myself, that is what I mean by that. Because I was saying that when we hadn't even properly started remote working yet. The world, that is. So yeah, I said it was a land grab. And I said, once you've got people on their knees and they're beholden to you, they're not going to speak up. You can do anything you basically want to them. And then you're going to make them financially destitute because they're going to be reliant on you. Then you're going to cut off their supply. What's going to be their reaction? What are they going to have to do? They're going to have to sell their assets in order to survive. And then once they've sold their assets, they are going to be reliant on the state. They have nothing now. They're reliant on the state because they no longer have their homes, cars, any stocks, shares, gold, whatever it was they were holding on to, because that 2 weeks to flatten the curve basically became 2 years, shutting down people's businesses, shutting down their places of work, unless it was the great big, conglomerates, and got people on their knees. And then I said to my friend, I'm not quite sure how they're going to get everyone, because not everyone runs their own business. Not everyone worked in an industry that had to shut down. Not everyone had to use their savings in order to survive. And then along came the gas and the electricity price hikes and the mortgage increases. And that basically finished a lot of people off, or we're now hanging on by a thread. So I said those words in March 2020. Here we are. Here we are. So I'm going to say, humanity, the ball is in your court. It's been thrown to you. What are you going to do with it? Are you going to sit on the sidelines and watch these tyrants get away with it and erode your rights? Or are you going to wake up and speak up and say those two little words from the heart, N-O, no? So I will leave it there. Very interesting chatting to you, ChatGPT. Thank you for today's food for thought. Marilyn Devonish, the NeuroSuccess coach. Seriously, and I'm just going to, sorry, one of the questions that have just come into my head, and people asking, what has it been like? Oh, that's cool. Sorry, I've just seen they've put my poster board up for voting. Is the election soon? Anyway, I digress. So what has it been like for the past 5 years speaking up? Because for those first, 3 years, I was, you're a lone voice. Because as we now know, people were shadow banned, they were booted off social media, groups were shut down, who, particularly with the vaccine injuries, where they started realising that they were being told they were the only ones and they were rare. But it's a bit like amoebas, where they started going out into the world and going, is it just me? Is it rare? Am I the only one? They started meeting other people who had exactly the same thing. And suddenly you've got hundreds of thousands of people who have found each other. They're talking about it. They're supporting each other. They're letting each other know that they're not crazy, that it's not in their head, that it's not just anxiety, da, 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 da. And then those groups were shut down. And Twitter spoke, were hauled over the coals in Congress. Mark Zuckerberg did a public statement where he also confirmed that the Biden administration told him to do all of these things. So that's no longer conspiracy theory, because again, that's another thing that caused people to kind of shut down, or is a way of ridiculing people by calling them conspiracy theorists. But for those of you who have been paying attention, pretty much all of the conspiracy theories are now, as one of the people who was around in the JFK days said, that it's, you know, now conspiracy fact. Now he was talking about JFK and the magic bullet and all of that sort of stuff, and people who spoke up at that time, they were called conspiracy theorists in order to silence them and make them look stupid and sound stupid. So we're there, you know, we've had a replay of that scenario as well in the last 5 years. So people are asking, what has it been like to have been speaking up since March 2020? And I'll be honest, it's been challenging. It's been really difficult. I've had people that I considered to be friends or colleagues call me out, call me an idiot, tell me to shut the F up and all that sort of thing. One of them presented me with a Darwin Award, which is an award that you give someone if they're completely freaking stupid. You know, so I've had all of that. I've had people, you know, unsubscribing, unfriending, no longer talking to me. So the human equivalent of shadow banning. I've had people just up until yesterday, actually. So 21st of April, 2021, someone tell me I don't know crap, S-H-I-T. I don't know bleep about reality, and coming with, you know, the hatred and the daggers, etc. So yeah, that's not pleasant at all, and to have been going through that for 5 years, it's a lot, and it's a long time. So when we talk about the spirit and the soul, I absolutely get why many people didn't speak up, because that's brutal to go through that day in, day out, 24 hours a day, because these people are coming from all over the world, so it's constant. It's like the news cycle that we had of propaganda, safe and effective, safe and effective. It's like that. It just keeps coming. It just keeps coming. So it's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365, potentially 365 days of the year. It's a lot. And of course, then when what you're saying and sharing is not being seen, that also is the same with regards to your work and what you do. And then for people who, they might agree with what you're saying, but they actually don't necessarily want to publicly associate with you. So they're no longer sharing your stuff. They're no longer talking about what you do. All of that is that slow erosion as well. So I salute and I take my hat off to those of you who have been speaking up, who have put your head above the parapet, who have, as I believe they say in Australia, you've bucked the trend and you've gone for the tall poppy syndrome. If you don't know what the tall poppy syndrome is, look it up. It's a very interesting analogy, but in a nutshell, the tall poppy is the one that's going to get cut down because it's head and shoulders above the rest, so it's visible. So yeah, I salute you. I take my hat off to you, because we have lived through probably the greatest form of propaganda in modern times, because when you think about propaganda from the past, they had leaflets, they had posters, they were just starting to get newsreel. However, they didn't have social media. They didn't have 24/7 television. They didn't have thousands and thousands and thousands of channels and news media channels. They didn't have Facebook. They didn't have Instagram. They didn't have Twitter. They didn't have LinkedIn. They didn't have, X now. They didn't have any of that. They didn't have all of the newspapers, both in print and online, that we have now. And this propaganda exercise was global. It was lockstep. So it was coming from all angles through every single media. And in terms of that erosion, the government here at least tried to bring in laws that would shut down some of those independent platforms, like Rumble, for example. So they made moves to shut them down and not give people, because when people were booted off Twitter, as it was then, it wasn't X that were booting people off, it was Twitter. And when their groups were closed on Facebook, they needed and wanted somewhere else to go. So they ended up on things like Substack, like Rumble, and the government here were trying to move in to put all sorts of loopholes in place and to make the people who own those platforms personally responsible for for every single word that people said or that people typed or that people uploaded. And then when you've got that kind of pressure and responsibility, your natural reaction will be, well, hold on a minute, I can't have anyone on this platform then, because you can't govern for what every single person is going to say. So yeah, it's been really challenging, to say the least. And that's probably just painted a tiny little picture of some of the things. Now, I wasn't, luckily, I don't know how, it's by some miracle. I was booted off YouTube in November 2019. And I said to the same friend that I talked to about the land grab, I said to her, something weird afoot, something weird going on. Something's going to happen in 2020. It's going to want to shut down independent voices. And I said that to her. We were in a place called the Global Buffet in Watford, which is where I live, having a Christmas lunch. It was an MBS, a Mind, Body, Spirit, Energy Fest workshop lunch. So we were just on our way there, and I was giving her the update of what had happened in trying to get my YouTube channel back. And I said to her, something's brewing, something's going to happen in 2020 that's going to take down independent voices and people who are in the personal development space. I didn't know what that thing was. But a mere 3 months later, it's like, aha, it all becomes clear. So that was weird. But I was my LinkedIn channel, which actually was very weird because I only use LinkedIn for work. I'm not having existential discussions. I'm not talking about any of this stuff on LinkedIn. It was purely for work, the coaching, the therapy, the photo reading, etc. And my channel was just bang shut down one day last summer, so in 2024, and just gone, never got it back. I had my LinkedIn account for best part of 20 years, had thousands of followers, was in the middle of lots of conversations with people, organizations about designing corporate workshops for them, etc. And just one day, bang, gone, never got it back. So there's been a lot of fallout to this, unfortunately. So for those who still support what I do, thank you, because without you, I wouldn't be able to keep going. So there you have it. My conversation today with ChatGPT, Marilyn Devonish, the NeuroSuccess coach, rapid transformation specialist, Futurist from transformationstm.com. Over and out. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And as they used to say in Grange Hill, just say no. Catch you later.